Now, here are some best practices in peer review, because peer review does rely on trust and it's a mutual community exercise. Now, Retraction Watch has had these headlines that authors have been reviewing their own papers, there's peer review scams, or the peer reviewer stole the information from the paper that they were peer reviewing. So how do we make sure that peer review is ethical? Well, there are guidelines based on COPE, on the Committee on Publication Ethics, that's at publicationethics.org, and from ICMJE, that's the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors. So here's a summary. So peer reviewers also are meant to declare their conflicts of interest. That's any possible bias that might change the way that they make decisions or opinions or might review the paper. Reviewers have to give the correct personal details and not manipulate the peer review process. They need to reply quickly when they get an invitation to review. Sometimes you get just the abstract, sometimes you get the whole manuscript. And if you know you don't have time, or it's the wrong topic area, or you don't accept the peer review model of that journal, then you need to decline the invitation. You can recommend other people, but do this neutrally and truthfully, and you can't forward information to another researcher or colleague, for example, for them to give their opinions to help you without the journal's permission. If you do get help, you need to state this and also say which parts you didn't review. You can't contact the authors directly, and you must keep to the deadline and the journal guidelines. You shouldn't delay the review process on purpose, and your review has to be concise, courteous, and constructive. And we'll talk about more about this on Wednesday's webinar. No libel, so that means you can't write personal attacks, and no bias. And if you find there's some citations missing, you can only recommend those references that are relevant. You can't just give 20 of your own references to the author and make them include it to boost your own citation count. You must keep the manuscript confidential, destroy the materials afterwards, and not use any of the information until after publication with appropriate citation. And if the journal uses double-blind review, but you find out who the author is because they forgot to remove their name from the paper, then you must inform the journal. Also inform the journal if you suspect any ethical problems with the reporting or with the research. Now, the role of the peer reviewer is to criticize and improve the research and not the researcher. So you're helping the editor judge the suitability of the work for the journal and to be a mentor and improve the quality of the work. Don't just criticize and complain. You can find good points too. And if you do find mistakes, pinpoint where the specific mistakes are. Give examples and look for logical flaws, such as confusing cause and association, comparisons that aren't quite parallel, and circular arguments. Again, on Wednesday's webinar, we'll look more at how to identify faulty logic and how to do good academic arguing. Check that claims have support, and check ABC, that's faulty assumptions and biases and contradictions. Now, suggest reasons for the faults and suggest improvements, and number your points so that the author can follow and reply in a systematic way, and say whether the revisions are major or minor, or mandatory or optional. Now, you shouldn't just correct the language, but if you do notice something like a sentence that has 2 or 3 meanings, you can point this out. Or if the author has made a mistake and used the wrong word throughout, for example, instead of clinical trial, they've put clinical trail all the way through, then you can let them know. Look out for ethical problems, and follow the journal instructions and any international guidelines. For example, for human and animal study, there are checklists in the equatornetwork.org website. The journal might ask you to use their own scoring system or online form or some other form. So do what the editor asks, and always remain professional and polite, and use simple English because the author may not have English as their first language. Now, all these guidelines also apply to the etiquette when you write letters to the editor or comment on a paper online. You have to be professional and no trolling, which is trying to provoke or harass an author. Now, two things you need to look out for are validity and reliability. Validity is, are you studying what you think you're studying? And that's related to accuracy, how close the data are to the ideal. And there are two types. Internal validity is the quality of your study, and external validity is how does your study relate to the real world. So here's an example of accuracy or validity. So if you're asked to find the center of a square piece of paper, you might fold it in different ways, and then you would be quite accurate to find the middle of that piece of paper. But you can't really apply the same method if I asked you to find the center of, say, a large square field. So it will have accuracy and internal validity, but not external validity. The other related term is reliability. Are your results consistent? And this is linked to precision. How close are your data? So if the same person does the test another time, the results should be repeatable. Or if more than one person does the test, they should be able to reproduce and get similar results. So these data, for example, are not precise. They're not grouped together, whereas these data are grouped together. They're precise, but they're not accurate. It's not the center of the square. Now, I said before, you need to alert the journal if you find ethical problems. So these could be to do with animal or human studies. And if you know the author's name, maybe they haven't written their conflicts of interest or funding source. If you've noticed that you've read the paper before, then this is duplicate publication. That's not allowed. And salami slicing is where the data are a bit too thin, and that's where the author is trying to cut the study up and have many, many papers, but each one doesn't say enough. And if you review for another journal, maybe you notice you get the same submission. So that means the author is trying to submit to more than one journal at the same time, and that's not allowed. Now, this is difficult to look for, and editors don't expect reviewers to be like the police and look for fraud and fraudulent data. But if you do notice something suspicious, you can alert the editor. Also, if you recognize any text that has been copied, as well as these other minor things but are still important. So incomplete reporting, misleading analyses, omitting data, citation bias, not registering a trial, misleading conclusions, or reproducing something without copyright permission. So COPE, the Committee on Publication Ethics, has flowcharts that editors and reviewers should follow. Again, this is at publicationethics.org. You should notify the journal and don't pursue your own investigation unless the journal asks you to help. Now, you yourself as a reviewer should be careful of unethical practices because you might get some strange invitations, so don't be tempted. Now, because some journals allow authors to recommend reviewers, you might have a colleague who asks you to do mutual review, even though you're not meant to if you work in the same group. Or the author will give a fake name and email address which routes back to you or themselves. So again, you're reviewing each other's papers. Or a third party might be involved in giving fake review. Or a journal you haven't heard of might send you spam and ask you to become an editor or reviewer, but the topic, the discipline is not yours, and it's a questionable journal. It promises unreasonable things like very fast peer review in 2 days, or it guarantees publication for a fee, so it's trying to cheat authors. And the website is poor quality and shows either no articles or many articles of all different disciplines, even though, for example, it's meant to be a physics journal. And by looking at some of the articles, you can tell the peer review is very poor quality. And the editorial board or reviewer board might be fake too. So watch out for spam inviting you to become a reviewer for that type of journal. And some authors, when they realize and they try to withdraw their paper, they have to pay a fee to the journal too. So there's actually a checklist in the website thinkchecksubmit.org that helps authors and reviewers to find trustworthy journals.